Hey folks, how's it going? This is Ferdozy here. This is going to be the first in a series of videos on Warfare Online. Now, this is a pretty fun game. It's basically like a fairly casual sort of real-time strategy game. Um, if you are familiar with it, then this will be basically the first step after the initial tutorial into building a platoon. Now, that's not really covered in the in-game tutorial, but it's actually a very large part of the game. Now, I know that a lot of players have sort of felt like after they first start playing, and they go up and they start playing against other players who have been playing for a little bit longer, and they have a lot of unlocks, and they have a lot of cool support assets and operations assets available to them, they feel like they're not very competitive. Now, there are certainly some things that you can't really do very well unless you have certain cards available to you, but then that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't viable strategies that you can use when you're first starting the game out to set up a platoon that actually does work pretty well. Now, if you look here, these units that I've selected, none of them have any upgrades unlocked at all. I mean, I have unlocked them, but they're not assigned to these units. This is bone stock, the way you get them the moment you start playing. So the purpose of this platoon is basically just to give you an idea of what you should be looking to do when you first start playing the game. Now, there are two things unlocked here that are not default. One of them is the Helm D. Now, that's a very cheap and affordable support asset that I enjoy using because it cancels a fire support asset that the other player uses. Now, that often comes in very handy when you're trying to hold down a position and they're trying to rush you, and they use that fire support to knock out one of your machine gun teams or your sniper teams, and it's definitely worth the investment. If you don't want to use that, if you don't have that unlocked yet, I would recommend maybe using something like infantry resupply or something like that to increase the number of reinforcements that you have available to you. And that brings me to the operation that I have selected here. Now, when you first start the game, you actually don't have any operations unlocked. This is another basic operation that's available. You can create it for 50 munitions, which is very, very cheap. And that will actually allow you to have 2 additional reinforcements of your snipers, your riflemen, your ATs, and your machine gun team at the cost of 1 LAV. Reinforcement, or any additional vehicles that you have, they'll all have 1 less reinforcement. So when you're trying to set up a platoon that is more defensive, and that's actually how this platoon plays out, it's definitely a good idea to try and increase the number of reinforcements that you have, which is why in here we have a very good mix of reinforcements for the long game. You have a few different support assets here that will allow you to get your units out a little bit faster. And then in addition to that, you also have some very defensive buffs, defensive attack sites here that actually keeps an enemy vehicle from firing. Those are very useful. And then in addition to that, you also have a few different options for when you're pushing and you're advancing and you want to help give your men just that little bit of extra oomph. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get into matchmaking, and we'll see if I can show you how to use this platoon effectively. Now, a lot of different strategies are very similar. Depending on which deck you're using, there's essentially 2 different ways that you can play. You can play defensively or you can play aggressively. A lot of players, once they start getting those new cards, they like to move on to an aggressive rush style. I enjoy making rush decks because beyond that initial rush, there is a lot that goes into sustaining the game after that, and that, for me, is the biggest part of the game that I enjoy, is building these decks and just sort of testing them out and see how well they work. So right off the bat, let's see, we got reinforcements ×2, and we have a defensive order. Now, the defensive order is a little bit high cost. For the beginning of the game, I sort of want to emphasize getting units out and getting myself set up in a way that will prevent us from getting rushed. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out all of those. I don't need reinforcements right at the start of the game, so I'm going to send those back into the deck and draw them later, hopefully at a more convenient time. Assault team is very useful. Oscar Mike not so much, and then the smoke mortar. if they do rush us, it might actually be useful to sort of hold them back a little bit, reduce their accuracy. The first thing I'm going to do, as many players enjoy doing with more defensive decks, is I'm going to send out a machine gun team. Now on this particular map, things can actually get a little bit complicated. I don't like using this medium cover very much, simply because it can be destroyed. Now that of course means that you don't really have a whole lot of side-by-side supports here.
MG team on the field. Over.
He has pushed all the way up. He's being very aggressive at the start here. And so because of that, I'm going to actually send that other machine gun team all the way up there, and I'm going to deploy that assault team just to get a little bit more territory. I'm going to try and get that assault team up to where he has his rifleman team right now, and he's using buffs to sort of hold that position for a little bit longer. And then we get some snipers out so we can put them behind this broken up Humvee and get a sort of overlapping coverage for fire here. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and shuffle everything around, and now everybody should have fairly similar ranges available to them. These snipers might be a little bit far behind, but that's fine at the moment, and because of his current stance, he's sort of slowed down a lot. We're going to go ahead and slow down as well. Now we do have that LAV that's just about to be ready, and we'll go ahead and deploy that. Now with that LAV, I think we're going to go ahead and deploy a few riflemen with it. That way, if he does deploy any sort of anti-tank teams or something like that, we'll have something there with them to sort of try to shoot them before they are able to shoot out that LAV. It sounds like he's got some snipers up. That machine gun team is a little bit worse for the wear, but it should be okay in our situation. And now, just to help with this push, I'm going to use that Oscar mic. That's a 5-cost card, but it is very effective. He's used sensor interference, so we can shoot, but we do have reduced accuracy. I'm going to use that Helm D now. It's going to be very tempting for him to try and attack that LAV with an artillery strike, if it survives that long. Come on, that might have been too late. Yep, that was too late. But the good thing is he's sort of forced himself into deploying these anti-tank teams, which are not very effective against riflemen. So,
MG team on the field. Over.
That being said, we're going to go ahead and dig in right outside his outpost. We're going to use fire up just a little bit, get those back units coming in here a little bit faster. And he just tried to use some fire support and got canceled by that Helm D, so that definitely did come in handy, and that will be it. As you can see, we did start pretty slow there, and like I said, this is a more defensive deck. It just so happened that in that particular situation, there was an opening for us to rush forward, as his initial rush died out quite quickly. So that's always something to be looking for, and that's one in the bag. So let's go ahead and try and do 2 more of these battles and see if we can go 3 for 3, just to sort of demonstrate the capabilities that you have when you're first starting out. The biggest thing that you have to remember with decks like this is that on the one hand, you can't get very aggressive unless there's a good opening. And the other thing is, you have to be keeping in mind how many units you're losing versus how many units he's losing. So if you have 3 rifleman squads and you send them up against a machine gunner squad or 2, and you only take out 1 machine gun squad for those 3 rifleman squads, that might not be a good trade. So you might want to wait until you have a whole lot more, so that when you actually do get in his fire range, you're actually eliminating his units faster than he's eliminating yours. Now, this is a pretty good start. I think I'm going to wait on the repair drop, and I think I'm going to wait on the artillery strike as well. That will be very useful for our machine gunners if we need to use it. And the attack sites is also pretty welcome as well. So we have a very good defensive hand here starting out. The one good thing about this map here is that it allows you to have a lot of units stored up in the back. I generally stop right here at these two heavy covers. That's normally where I set up my line. And he's deployed a rifleman right off the bat here, which sometimes can be a signal for a rush, but I don't necessarily think that that's what's going on here. He did just use rapid infantry response, and he deployed a sniper team, which I should definitely pay attention to. Consider deploying my own sniper team. Another good counter to snipers is assaults, and he actually just made a small mistake there. He deployed his snipers far up enough for my MGs to engage him, and at this point all of my units are available, and I'm gonna go ahead and deploy that. Now another thing you can do is, as opposed to just deploying that LAV immediately, is you can actually build up a force to go with the LAV before you deploy it, because you can't stop those vehicles. Once those vehicles start rolling, they will continue rolling all the way up until they get to the enemy's base or get destroyed. So one good thing to do is sort of build up your infantry before you deploy those vehicles, so that they have a lot more support and they can take out those AT teams before they get to your vehicles. Now he's got that AT team right there. They are firing on it. I do have my infantry pushing up, and now at this point I think he will probably start panicking and deploying as many AT teams as he can, and honestly this will probably end up being a very similar situation to the last game. Of course, the biggest thing to take away from this is that you should never be waiting on your unit timers. You should always know exactly what you're going to deploy. I've been waiting for about 5 seconds there after that last rifleman unit was available. If I decided to deploy a rifleman at that point, which in certain conditions, yes, if you need a certain kind of unit, go ahead and deploy it. Don't feel like you have to deploy a unit just because it's the longest timer and it's available at that point. But you should definitely be trying to decide what unit you're going to deploy before it's available. That way you're not wasting time on the next unit's timer. And even if you're not in a rushing setup, you always want to keep that in mind, because if you even if you're not rushing, you still need to have those units on the field. So definitely keep that in mind. It's definitely something to practice. Now you can actually use a lot of hotkeys in this game. Almost all the actions that you perform in this game can be performed on the keyboard. I generally like to find a good balance. I do the majority of my gameplay with the mouse, but then I normally keep my other hand on the left and right arrow keys to sort of scroll back and forth with my separate hand. That being said, this game doesn't really have a whole lot going on as compared to like a more traditional real-time strategy game, so that's normally enough for you to be able to keep up with all the timers and stuff, not get overwhelmed. Okay, so here we go. We're 2 out of 3. Let's see if we can finish it out with one more strong victory. Hunker down, that's a very good card to have. It's very cheap, and it's also very good when you use it on a MG squad in a defensive role. So mortars are also very useful. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this to get a little bit more diversity in our starting hand here. And we actually got the exact opposite, but that's okay. Now I'm going to play this one a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and deploy my 2 machine gun teams. And he's gone quite aggressively at the beginning of the game here. They didn't quite make it to cover, which is not a good thing. And instead of deploying that second MG team, I'm going to take just a little bit of a risk here, and I'm going to wait for that sniper team to be available. honestly, this might not be the most effective strategy at this point, especially now that he has 2 units on the field and I have 1 sniper team, and sniper teams do not have a whole lot of hit points, which puts me in a little bit of a precarious situation. And I'm going to use hunker down on those guys to give them a little bit more protection. And I'll use it on these guys as well. Now that I have a good base of fire, I'm going to go ahead and use a few riflemen to increase the number of infantry that I have. And push them up to that next cover. And that MG squad is actually starting to get thinned out a little bit, so I'm going to try and replace that. He's having trouble maintaining this front at the moment, so that's definitely a good sign for us. Try and push these rifleman squads up. Now that I have a good base of fire, plenty of units available to me, I'm going to go ahead and wait for that next sniper team. Actually, I'm going to take a survey of the field real quick. He does have 1 AT team, so I think the snipers are the better option at the moment. He just deployed a sniper team of his own. And based on that, I'm actually going to go ahead and wait for that LAV. I'm in a position that allows me to do so, and I'm going to go with that. Now at this point I could go either with MGs or riflemen. Both of them have fairly short timers. I'm going to go with quantity over quality at the moment. I got to try and push up so I have coverage on that middle of the field, get a little bit more territory here. Use a little bit of a buff there. Now, and I need to try to get a MG team here and an MG team here. They look like they might actually make it. Just barely.
MG team on the field.
I could use the mortar strike in this situation. It looks like he might be trying to go for a vehicle. He hasn't deployed a unit in a very long time. And that's normally a sign that a vehicle is around the corner. I do have that artillery strike ready, and I am full on support right now. I have all 10 support points, which is an excellent sign. So I'm going to wait a little bit, and I'm going to get 1 AT team out here. And I'm going to push this rifleman squad up to take out that sniper squad. And they're doing a fine job of that. Had a little bit of lag there on the deployment for the AT team, which is something that does happen from time to time, especially when I'm sitting here and trying to commentate on everything that I do in real time. Maybe in the future I'll try and do a little bit more in post, but currently I'm just going to go ahead and comment as I go. And we got that rapid infantry response. Let's get a sniper team out. Those are useful to have, but those long timers often can be very difficult. He still hasn't deployed a vehicle, so perhaps he was deploying a sniper team. Yes, he does have a sniper team there. Get that Helm D up, so now I'm okay from fire support for a little bit, and this, I believe, is a good time for us to rush forward with everything that we have. Try and occupy these covers outside his base, and that should do it. Drop an artillery strike just to speed things up a little bit. And there you have it, folks. 3 games, 3 victories, 2 cards that honestly, especially the Helm D, you can replace with something else that is default that would work just fine. The infantry operation, to my knowledge, we didn't actually use that a whole lot in the games that we played. Those extra reinforcements certainly help when you're in a big slugfest, and it ends up coming down to who has the most reinforcements at the end of the day. And when you're playing defensively, that actually does happen quite a bit. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a little bit inspired, maybe have a few ideas for what you want to do for your own platoon. Of course, this isn't the only platoon setup that works. You can always make a few different variations, test things out, try new things. When you're building a platoon, sometimes you can just be like thinking of a certain strategy or the way that a certain unit performs and trying to build an entire platoon around that. And honestly, the biggest part, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things I enjoy the most about this game is just building those platoon decks. So maybe I'll see you guys around online sometime. I'll continue to upload videos, probably around making particular decks and just sort of testing out new strategies and that kind of stuff. This game is in early access, and there is going to be continuing revisions to how the different units act and play. So that's something I always look forward to. Just because a platoon works well at one point doesn't necessarily mean that if you come back the next 2 months while we're in early access, that it'll perform the same way. Right now there's a lot of balancing that's going on, and one of those concerns is to make sure that you can actually make a successful platoon from the start of the game. And hopefully, like I said, hopefully you have a few good ideas about how you can go about doing that. And I look forward to uploading more videos in the future. You all have a good day. Thanks.